Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I want to actually talk a little bit more about philosophy, and specifically I want to review an attitude, an idea, an idiom that's really common in the world of, any kind of high-end tool, whether it's pocket knives, whether it's watches for your wrist, whether it's tools that you use, for work, for home improvement, for things like that, or even for cars. And the idea is buy once, cry once. It's sort of along the lines of go big or go home. Basically, the idea is that you should always pay a little bit more. You should, don't feel, yeah, sure, if you pay a little bit more money, you're going to cry a little bit because it's sad. You just lost a lot of money. But in the end, you're only going to cry once that first time, rather than if you go cheaper, you're going to end up paying a lot more and you're going to end up crying a whole bunch more down the road. I think there's a lot of good to that attitude, but unfortunately, there's also some bad and some ugly. So we're going to talk a little bit about this idea, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So let's jump into it. So first, on the good side, if you buy a $5 wrench, it may last you 3 weeks. It may last you 3 months. It may last you 3 years. Whereas if you buy a $15 wrench, it might last you 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. And so you're in a situation where, if you think about it in this way, if you buy quality at the start, you can actually save money. You are getting a much better deal buying one $20 wrench than you are buying six $5 wrenches, because there's a lot more frustration in the middle there. There's, oh crap, this just broke. It can definitely save you money. In the same way, I mean, I'm sure we've all got that friend who buys a series of $1,000 cars. Every 4 months they're buying a new car because the last one broke down. And so as a result, in the course of 5 years, they've spent 8 grand on $1,000 cars, rather than just buying one car for 5 or 6 grand. That can be really, really wasteful, and that can be a big problem. And so this is a really good attitude in that way. If you consider it this way, if you think to yourself, okay, I can do it right this time, or I can just buy a bunch of crap, it usually works out better for you in the long run to, buy once and cry once. Next benefit of it is that it actually does promote quality. So much right now is a race to the bottom, especially if you go out to the store. Like you're buying a blender or something like that. So much of what's out there is cheap crap. It's made in China and Bangladesh and Taiwan, whatever. And it's really, really poorly done. And you can get like a $15 blender that's going to last you 5 minutes. But that's kind of ugly. And you get a lot of waste. It's just a terrible thing for the world and for the environment in general. And so this kind of attitude of, yeah, I'm willing to pay a little bit more up front, but I want to get good quality from it in the end, that's a beautiful thing. And that can be a good thing not just for you, but for the world on the whole, to get back to a world where quality is important. So that's another beautiful thing here. Speaking of beautiful things, this idea, this attitude can force you to drop the pretense. What I mean by that is, very, very often, I'll use the watch world as an example. You'll see somebody who posts in a watch forum and says, I really like a given watch, like the Rolex Submariner, for instance, is really common. I love the Submariner, but I'm not willing to spend that kind of money. What kind of watch can I buy that's only, 5 grand? Because the Rolex is going to cost you like 8 grand or something like that. What watch can I buy for 5 grand that's really similar to that? And right there, I hear that, and it's like, oh, buddy, you're on the train to hurt town. Because I see what's going to happen. They're going to buy something for 5 grand that looks a lot like the Submariner and kind of scratches that itch. But then they're going to realize, wait a second, this isn't quite it. I don't quite, they've got in their mind what they really want anyways, and then they're not there. And so they're going to sell that, and they're going to lose maybe a couple hundred, maybe $500-600 on that, especially if they bought it retail. Then they're going to buy something else that's a little bit more expensive that they think is going to scratch the itch a little bit better. And then they're going to lose money selling that. Then they're going to buy, and then finally, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years later, they're just going to say, God damn, and they're going to drop the pretense and they're going to buy what they wanted in the first place. And in the process, they have spent the amount that they were initially scared of spending, and they've lost a bunch of money on the side. Same thing in the knife world. Very, very often people will talk about, oh, the Chris Reeve knife Sebenza. It's an aspirational knife for a lot of people. I'm not a huge fan, but whatever. I want to get one of these, but I don't want to pay that kind of money. And so they'll buy a bunch of cheap solutions that add up to the price of a Sebenza, when they could have just went there and done it. I am actually guilty of this guy. When I was first looking for a really nice high-end watch, I saw this guy, the Citizen Perpetual Diver. Retails about $600, and I just couldn't picture paying that for a watch. And so I bought another watch, and I bought another watch. And eventually I ended up getting a good deal on this, so it worked out for me in the end. But nonetheless, now that I got it, it's like, damn it, I should have just bought this in the first place, and I would have avoided taking some baths. So in some ways, this attitude, the understanding that, you know what, if you really want this, just do it now. Drop the freaking pretense and buy it, can be an excellent thing. It's a good way to identify if you're really after one specific thing, and then to tell you to just save up for it and do that thing and drop the pretense. The last benefit to this attitude I want to talk about is the price of daily joy and the cost of daily pain. Imagine that every time that you reach into your pocket, you're carrying a really terrible pocket knife, like the Z-Hunter. Every single time you take this out of your pocket, you're going to feel a little bit, about it. It's like, wow, this is just not a very good knife. This isn't cutting all that well. This isn't, etc. And so every time, if you use a knife on a regular basis, you go to use yours, you're not going to feel so stellar about it. You're not going to be super happy. Or if you're wearing a crappy watch, same thing. Every time you look down at your watch, you're like, oh man, I wish I could do better than this, or something like that. That adds up after a while. And compare that to the other side, a daily joy. If every time you look down at your watch, you're like, wow, this is a really excellent watch. I like this watch a lot. It brings you joy. There's something joyous to you. Or every time I reach into my pocket and I pull out a Sleesh Bowie, which is a great knife that I like a lot, it's like, wow, this is a beautifully constructed object. I'm glad I've got this in my life. That's a beautiful thing, and that adds up. If every time you look down at your watch, you smile a little bit, or every time you pull out your knife, you smile a little bit, or conversely, if every time you look down at whatever it is, you feel a little twinge, I don't like that so much. Those things add up. And so I'm not saying material possessions will bring you happiness, but it can be nice to look down and have something to smile at every time you check the time. So that's something that's hard to put a price on. And that's a thing that works into that buy once, cry once thing. Even if you're paying a lot, if you're really in love with what you end up with, that'll pay back in a way that I don't think a lot of people are thinking about at the time. Unfortunately, though, this also has some bad to it. One of the downsides of this attitude is that it's very easy for it to swell and start to encompass things that you really don't care about. And it stops making sense. I got a confession to make. Some number of years back, I needed a blender. I thought, I'm going to be making a lot of smoothies, and I was making smoothies at the time. So I'm going to get the very best blender that I can. I didn't have one at the time. So I went out and I did my research, and I found the Cadillac of blenders. And I paid a fair amount of money. I think I paid like $200 for it. It was ridiculous. But nonetheless, so for the last 10 years, I have had the Cadillac of blenders. And in the last 10 years, I have used the Cadillac of blenders like 6 times. I don't do a lot of blending, it turns out. And so I tied up a bunch of money in something that I never freaking use, under the understanding that if I buy once, I cry once. And now it's the case that every time I take out this blender, I cry a little bit, because it's like, Nick, why the heck did you spend that much money on a blender? Because I don't need that. And so this is something you really do have to keep in mind. If it's a tool you're not using, if it's something you don't care about, if you don't really care about your socks, and you don't have a strong functional need, then just buy some socks that work. You don't need $50 socks from Whole Foods. I don't know if Whole Foods sells socks. They probably do, knit by Tibetan monks, something like that. But anyways, keep that in mind. And there's actually kind of a similar version of this I've heard in the tool world, which is when you need a brand new tool, go out and buy a relatively inexpensive one. And then when you break that, go buy the best, because you know you actually need it. I think that's a really good strategy here. You should never buy the best of something that you don't know that you're actually going to need. A related downside is that sometimes it gets perverted into always overpay or always buy the most expensive thing. And, you can hear this. The mating call of the person who always overpays is, just give me the top of the line. You walk into a computer store. You hear some jackass walk in there, I need a computer. What kind? Just give me the top of the line. It's like, okay, you got a lot of money, so you're just going to buy the most expensive version of everything. And that's well and good, but if somebody's walking in and buying the top-of-the-line drill and they don't know how to use a drill, That's a problem, and that's not what this is about. You should always do some research here. You don't want to just trust that the most expensive one is going to be the very best, because oftentimes that's not the case. The most expensive knives are often not very good functionally speaking. If you want to buy a good wristwatch and you buy a $80,000 Patek and then you wear it in the pool, you got yourself a problem here. So always do your research. Always buy the best, but that doesn't mean buying the most expensive. And you should only buy the best if it's something you care about. Just saying. So you got to be careful that this doesn't transform into that. Just like, okay, give me something expensive, because that's really counterproductive. And you end up crying each time, and you end up with a bunch of money tied up in things you don't give a damn about, coming back to number one. And then finally, on the bad side, you have to remember your cost carry comfort curve. This is something I talk about in one of my other videos, but basically the idea is that there's a certain level at which you're going to feel comfortable using something. If you buy a drill for $800, you may not feel comfortable actually using it in a home improvement setting because you put that much money into it. Or if you're carrying around a $4,000 pocket knife, you may not actually feel comfortable using it to open a box. And that's stupid, because at that point, you've no longer bought something that's good. You're crying every time you take it out there. Same thing with watches. A lot of people, oh, well, if you like the Rolex, just buy the Rolex. Well, sure, but not everybody's comfortable carrying around an $8,000 watch on their wrist. I don't think I would be, although I'd sure love to get comfortable with it someday. Nonetheless, you got to remember that. You can't go into this thinking, okay, I want the very best, and then end up with something so expensive that you're afraid to use it, or afraid to actually carry it. So that's the final thing you got to really remember here in terms of your bad. Unfortunately, there is one really ugly thing that happens with this idiom. The ugly here is that a lot of people live by this, but then they forget that not everybody can, because living like this is a bit of a privilege and it's a bit of a luxury. You're effectively front-loading things. You're saying, you know what, I'm going to pay a little bit more right now for something that lasts longer, that brings me more joy in the long term. But not everybody can afford to pay a little bit more right now, and I think a lot of people tend to forget that. You'll see on a forum, somebody will post, even just like a home repair forum or something, somebody will post something showing, and tools will be showing it. People will pile on like, oh, those tools are terrible, that's a terrible brand, you should never use that brand, that crap, you should have bought these guys. And, the person, it's like, at some level, that's really crappy. And sometimes you see the person just seems a little bit hurt by it, like, that's what I could afford, bro. And so, if you forget about that fact, it really comes off as asshole-ish. Similarly, in the wash world, people will, post something like, again, the Rolex. I want something that looks like a Rolex Submariner. My budget is $80. And then you get these jackasses who say, well, you should just save up for the Submariner. It's like, you idiot. You're recommending that they save up for something that is 80 times their budget. Are you listening to yourself? Do you filter any of this? And I don't know. So, I mean, this issue, it's straightforward to a lot of people with money, but it's really expensive to be poor. For this very reason. If you've only got $5 when you walk into the home improvement store for a wrench, you're walking out with a $5 wrench. And it's important not to forget that. It's important not to be dickish about that. Instead of saying, wow, that tool is a piece of crap, why would you buy that crap? You can say something like, oh, I've heard a lot of mixed things about that brand. How's that working out for you? I prefer Weehaw screwdrivers, or something along those lines. But still, it's really easy to turn this into being a dick, and you should not be a dick. That's a little piece of advice there. So I guess final conclusion, this is a really good attitude to have because it makes you think about quality. It saves you money. It makes you drop the pretense, and that's a big one. If you're gonna buy it later on, just buy it now if you can afford to do so. And don't underestimate the benefits of daily joy and the problems of daily pain. But you should also remember only to do this with things you give a damn about. You should do your research. Don't just overpay. Remember your cost carry comfort curve, but most importantly, remember that not everybody can afford to do this. And don't use this little idiom as a justification to be a dick to people of lesser means. So there you go. I hope this was interesting, a little more philosophical than usual. Hey, guess you can review an idiom. I hope this was interesting, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day, and consider giving it a shot if you're not already. Bye now.